Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome to Beyond the Surface, where the saying to be seen is to be understood comes to life. I want to begin by first honouring the traditional custodians of the land we live and work on. I live and work on Gundungurra land and acknowledge the traditional landowners of my guests near and far. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the memories, the traditions and cultures of our First Nations peoples. The land below my feet is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. I am no stranger to the profound journey of pain, grief, anger and heartbreak that often accompanies the loss of church, community, faith and the unwinding of our core beliefs. In the midst of this labyrinth, I found healing in the stories shared by others who have walked a similar path. Each tale, unique in its own right, weaves an invisible thread of connection, uniting us through the tapestry of religious trauma and healing. Here, in the warmth of these digital walls, I want you to feel at home. This is a haven where your memories are not just acknowledged, but deeply seen and believed. So kick back, relax, and let's embark on a journey where your story is not just heard, but embraced. Welcome to a community where storytelling is a powerful force. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Joy. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited about this episode because obviously it's the first episode, which I
Oh,
just sprung on
congrats.
you before. But the reason that I wanted to do this episode first is because about 2.5, maybe 3 years ago, when my therapist first put the word deconstruction to some of the stuff that I was going through,
Mhm.
I decided, you know what, I'm just going to go online. And you were the very first person who I ever found. And so for the past
What?
like 2.5 years, for like the people who know me well, you are known as Joy Vetterlein, the deconstruction queen. So,
Oh my gosh.
so this is a really nice, like full circle moment, for
Oh,
me.
that's incredible. Wow. What an
Yeah.
honor. Thank you. I'm
So,
so happy to be here. It's so funny to I don't know, it's just I feel like Instagram can make it look so much more glamorous when it's really just like me hunched over my phone on the end of the bed, just like, oh, I
yeah.
had an idea. Let me write it down. And then later I like put a cool font with it. But it's like so much of just these thoughts on the go and
Yeah.
me just, yeah, being really like trying to figure out what's happening to me and like thinking of these things that I'm like, oh, that thought makes me feel so much better. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll share it in case it makes someone else feel better. So thank you. That is so cool. That makes me warms my cockles.
Good. And I think I loved most was because when I remember, obviously I found you quite quickly, but I remember the other people and the other pages and communities. There is obviously a lot of anger and a lot of bitterness,
Hmm.
and rightly
Hmm.
so for a lot of people.
Hmm.
But I was not in that space, so all I really wanted
Hmm.
was someone talking about it, not full of bitterness and rage
Hmm.
and just talking about it in a sort of, and I love the word that you use, which is reimagined. And
Hmm.
I was like, this is what I want. And so
Wow.
yeah, this is a really lovely full circle moment.
Oh, thank you. I'm
So,
so glad to be here. Yeah.
so,
I'm already tearing up a little, so this does not bode well for the rest of the
uh,
hour.
um, so where does your story start?
Well, um, I mean, I guess suppose all of our stories start with when we're born and the context we're born into. So, really the yes, the context of my story really starts with my parents, I would say, who um they were spiritual seekers in the 1960s and 70s. Are very much like part of the hippie movement. And so they found through a lot of seeking and dabbling and all kinds of things, they found their spiritual truth in becoming born again Christians
Mhm.
in the probably right around like 1980-ish,
Okay.
late 70s, early 80s. Aging myself a bit, but they pretty quickly transitioned into like they went all in. My dad went to seminary at a very conservative seminary, and they got involved in a bunch of like ministries, and he started going on the path to becoming a pastor. So my mom started going down the path of like, what does it mean to be a pastor's wife? So I feel for them, like knowing evangelical culture as I do, like they had such a pure entry into it. Like they really fell in love with the person of Jesus as it was presented to them and the freedom it was offered. And then just go so quickly
Mm,
got pulled into this, like, well, if you love Jesus, then here's how you raise your kids, and
mm,
here's how you like do this, and here's what you're supposed to do. And to their credit, like some of that they tried to do, and some of it they're like, no, that's not who we are.
yeah.
But that's the period I was born into. So I was born, my older siblings were not born into a Christian family. I was born into a Christian family. And
Ah,
that was still pretty new and fresh and significant. And when I was 5, my dad graduated from seminary and got a job as a pastor, and we moved to a small town, not a small town, but a small city in Alaska. So that was my whole childhood, was being a
mm,
pastor's kid and being a Christian. And I was a pretty good girl naturally, so it wasn't like a huge, I liked it. I liked that like we got perks, and
yeah.
when you're a pastor in Alaska, people are like, "Oh, here's some extra crab legs and here's some extra
Ah,
Christians." Yeah, so we got lots of perks. Like,
I love that the crab
um,
legs are the perks.
I know,
That's great.
right? I
Oh,
still don't know if I have had crab legs as good as I had as a kid when people just like
oh,
left them on our doorstep. But yeah, that really stood out to me as a kid, apparently. But
oh,
so yeah, I don't want to. Oh, okay, how to wrap it up. So yeah, just went through. I launched pretty firmly into the like good evangelical girl pipeline. So summer camps, rededicating my life to God, trying to witness to my friends,
mm,
trying to, going to youth group, reading my Bible, following do they have Brio magazine in Australia?
no.
Maybe not. Have you heard of Focus on the Family?
Oh, I think so, but not like
Okay.
it
Some of
would,
this is
yeah,
American culture.
yeah,
Anyways, if your American listeners are out there, they'll know.
yeah.
Anyways, I was all in.
Mm,
And so in college decided to go to a private Christian university, got my degree that included a Bible minor, and then started working for a church.
mm,
And like, yeah, it was uh, yeah, church, like even when I had kids and I stopped working for the church, I was still working for like a Christian publisher writing curriculum, and then I started working for another church. So it was just like I was just like in this Christian bubble my
mm,
whole life, and usually tied to either my parents' profession or to my like education or profession.
yeah.
So I think, sorry if that was a long answer, but
No,
that's like the context of where
yeah.
Joy the Christian started.
Yeah, and I think one of the commonalities between all of the people that I've talked with so far is that everybody was all in. It was like all consuming. It was like you said, that sort of Christian bubble, and it was sort of every facet of your life was somehow connected to the church or to your
Mhm.
faith. Um, what was it like being someone who was that consumed with their faith and their church and
That's a good question. I didn't, in many ways, you don't know what you're in till you're out of it later.
yeah.
But I think now it was really, um, I mean, there's parts of it I think that were probably good and that served me well. I developed a really personal relationship with God through some of the times I went through my when my dad stopped being a pastor. That was a very painful transition for our family. It was the church kind of stabbed him in the back and we had to leave our town. So everything I knew, it was really rough in that season. Yeah, I really felt that's really when, to use Christian language, my faith became my own
Mm,
because I truly had no support system and no one to depend on except this, this idea of Jesus in my head. And I leaned very heavily on that and developed a really significant connection to what I now would consider like my intuition and myself and, the greater forces of mystery in the world. But in that moment that I called that Jesus. So that was, I really valued that and that stayed with me and why I think that's why I was all in because I felt like I had experienced the goodness of God. I wasn't able to separate those significant personal relationships I had had from some of the institutional things that did kind of rub me the wrong way. It was like, well, like it's a package deal. I have to put up with all of these immature and unkind and dysfunctional people because I have this thing that I know is real and that I like. And like that, Jesus is, for what I believed then, telling me that these other people are my brothers and sisters in Christ.
yeah.
But um, I also think it made me, I was just thinking about this the other day. I think it made me insecure about a lot of things. Maybe more things besides insecure, but there was always a sense of like, am I living up to my full potential? Like the parable of the talents,
Mm,
where like to whom much has been given, much is expected. That made me feel incredibly nervous. I had a lot of
mm,
pressure on myself because I felt like I was someone I was like musical and I was getting good grades and I knew that I had been born into a place where like my parents were together and we had enough money to eat. And I mean, not much more than that. We certainly were not the most privileged of people when your dad stops being a pastor. It's not like the
yeah.
money's rolling in. But um, yeah, I just felt like I was always afraid of wasting my life, of disappointing God. I was afraid of missing opportunities to tell people about Jesus.
Yeah.
Made me insecure around people a lot because I felt like I couldn't just show up and be present to the moment without an agenda.
Mm,
And so it was always like, oh, here's this person, but like they're a new person. Is this a person I'm supposed to witness to? And like, how do I handle that? And is this the sign that now's the time? And like, shoot, I wish I'd read my Bible and prayed more this morning so I'd be more in tune with the spirit. Because what if I think it's the time, but it's not the time? Just like a lot of that sort of like frantic thinking, always second guessing myself and like the whole, yeah, like being a woman, especially once I got into ministry, that became more of a like, how come like those yahoos get all these like opportunities and perks? Like, I'm way more holy and like way more devoted than any of them. Like, I'm
yeah.
way more of a deep thinker, and like they're the ones getting asked to
Yeah.
preach. Like, are you kidding me? Like a fifth grader could have written that sermon, just like
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny because I think, I would hear the do not be anxious about anything scripture in so many sermons, and yet so many people are just sitting there like riddled with anxiety about,
yeah.
um, gosh, what if the choice that I'm making is not the choice that's part of God's plan for my
Mm-hmm.
life, and I'm stepping outside of that? And it's just this constant cycle of what ifs and
Yeah.
questions and um,
Yeah.
yeah, frantic thoughts. I love that. I think that's a really
Yeah.
great
Don't
imagery.
even, I think just now in this moment, I've realized I'm putting it together that like that sort of like circular thinking was in fact anxiety because I don't think I would have
Yeah,
like, would just be like, oh, I'm like, be holy as God is holy. And like, I'm doing this because I love God. And like, does he know I
yeah,
love him? And I want to please him. And, because he was there for me in all these meaningful times, I want to make sure I'm doing my part. But
yeah.
somehow, yeah. So.
Mm. It's hard being a woman in a church, isn't it?
It is. And it is. And yet, and you can answer this too. I think I'm like, it is hard being a woman, and yet I have white skin
Mm. Yes.
and
Yeah.
I am, I am cishet. And
Mm.
I know that like there are still many layers for which I had of a heteronormative experience, I guess. But even the amount I felt
Mm.
was yeah, real sucky. It
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
just and reflecting now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was putting up with so much sexual harassment that I
Mm.
didn't even like know to call it that. It was just like I bought into the like, well, boys will be boys. Like
Ah.
I was the only female on this one staff I was on, and the men would just sit around and like joke about, with like not overt, but lots of innuendo about how much they liked to do their wives. And I was like a
Oh my
single woman
goodness.
just sitting there and I'm like, like I'm one of the cool girls. I'm not offended by this. Like I can hang, even though I was like incredibly uncomfortable
Yeah.
because I'm over here trying to like uphold purity culture and you know,
Oh my goodness.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh my goodness. It just every
it's
time like
really
things like
awkward.
that again, it baffles me. But it is, I think obviously there are a lot of different layers in terms of marginalization and things like that. And obviously as a white cisgender woman, but a queer woman, that doesn't go down well in the church either. And so it's just all of these compounding layers that make realistically church a man's world. Really.
Yeah.
That's sort of like the crux of it. Um,
And it creates such a silo and echo chamber because the people who thrive in there are the ones who fit the norm. And so they naturally rise up through the ranks as leaders and share what works for them to connect with God, which is what works for a man who fits all of these demographic check
yeah.
boxes. And like they just keep spraying the thing. So then all these diverse people come in and think there's like, oh, I'm not like, this doesn't work for me to connect to God because I'm not like, but we don't think, oh, it's because I'm different and that's good and we need more diverse voices in the church. It's they say it with such authority and we're so conditioned to believe their authority that it's like, oh, they must know and I need to learn from them and like, oh, I just got to get this. I just need to surrender this part of me to God. And I just have this rebellious spirit in this way. I just need to surrender that. We just like always think that any difference is our fault. Now it makes me quite upset and I'm glad to be free from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just that sort of, I mean, they're the benchmark, right? So like
Yeah.
that's who you are conditioned to trust is sort of, that external
Yeah.
authority. Um, what impact did that have on trusting your own intuition and your own inner
Mm,
compass?
a lot.
Mm,
Yeah. I've always been a very like intuitive, sensitive person.
mm.
Um, I'm an HSP. I think I saw on something that you
Yeah,
are as well.
same. Yeah.
Which now I'm like, oh, that's my superpower. That's how
Mm,
I see the world. But at the time, um, I really felt like that was my biggest flaw was that I was overly emotional, overly sensitive. I, fully bought the teaching that your flesh is sinful and not to be trusted, and feelings are of the flesh. I was very much under really full in and believing the teaching that my feelings are of my flesh. My flesh is sinful. Therefore, my feelings are of my sinful nature, not to be trusted, not good guides. So I did a ton of, self gaslighting, spiritual bypassing of myself, and never trusted my feelings if they conflicted with what I had learned about something in the past.
Yeah.
And that really probably ties into that whole insecure thing. That was just torture. That's a torturous way to live when you're an intuitive person whose inner world is picking up all these single signals and telling you so many messages, and you're just like consistently denying them. Like, no, that can't be right. That can't be right. That can be right. Like, no wonder I was highly emotional. It's like you
Absolutely.
can't just live with that torture inside for so long. And I think ultimately, I think the older I got, the less I was able to do that. And that kind of ended up being part of a breaking point and just like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. How did you go from, I guess, the good Christian girl to being a pastor?
Okay, yeah, that was actually, I think for me, what I didn't have the word deconstruction for it then, but I think that sort of started the process because I was at one church from right after college for almost 10 years. And then I took a few years off. I was having kids. That's when I was kind of working for some parachurch organizations. But we started attending another church, and it was everything that the church we'd been in for 10 years lacked, like this church seemed to have. It was more casual and people were friendlier, and we made some friends right away. And I had met the pastor through work, and he was really kind and he became a friend. We just enjoyed talking to each other and working together on some of these projects for this other company I was working with. And so we started checking this church out and just really quickly felt at home there.
Mm.
And when that publishing company ended up like closing our, division or whatever, and he heard I was looking for a job, it was like 2 days later. He was like, "Hey, I hear you might be looking for a job. Like, I want to get you in somehow." And that was really great for what we needed at the time financially. It felt like a divine thing and a God thing. And I think he thought so too. And so over the next year, then he started talking to me about like, "Hey, like, I really think you have talent and love having you here. And like, we actually are looking for somebody to head up our worship and communications department. And I know it based on your background, like, I think you could do it. And like, this is a pastoral role. Like, what do you think?" And this was the first time I had ever even thought of myself as
Wow.
I hadn't even tried the idea on because the church I was in wasn't as conservative as they come, but it was very much like, sure, women can talk on stage on Sundays, but they can't preach. If they're
Yeah.
talking, they're sharing or speaking. Like, women can work here and be leaders, but they're directors, they're not pastors. Like, it was very much just like this undercurrent of complementarianism. That's what I had, and that's the college I went to. There was lots of systematic theology classes talking all about how women, were
Yeah.
made after Adam, and that's the order of creation, and that's the order of. Okay, so yes, I grew up with sort of this like inherited, somewhat understated, but very present sense of complementarianism that like women can be pretty great, but they're always going to come under the authority of man. And I had never really thought about it. I was pretty much like, yeah, I'm not going to like make a hard decision, but I kind of like fell in line like a good little lady soldier for
And
complementarianism. My husband and I had very much talked about this in our marriage, and both had agreed that this was absolute nonsense in a marriage, that there's no way a marriage can work if both people don't get to like say what they think and
yeah.
like each contribute their full strengths to the marriage. So at least I had that. When the senior pastor asked me to consider being a pastor, I felt really seen in some ways, that he was seeing this
Mm.
gift and skill and like calling, I guess, I had in me to help people. His thinking is like, some places require ordination. To me, a pastor is someone who shepherds souls. If you're going to be doing the work of shepherding souls, I'm going to call you a pastor. And
Right.
I was so grateful for that. And I like, he gave me a couple books to read. Blue Parakeet, I think is what it's called, by Scott McKnight. I think I have the book behind me somewhere, but that was like so empowering to be like, to go from, is it okay for me to do this? And to read and learn at that point think, oh, not only is it okay, but like we need more women leading things. Like we need to have this balance. And like, yes, I will. Yes, I can do that. Like that is what I'm supposed to do. And I was really honored and excited to like find that, yeah, that like, oh, it was like an opening in my soul of like, oh, I finally have permission to be sort of what I've always been.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was like, huh, I was wrong about this.
Yeah.
Huh. Like, what am I wrong about other things?
Mm.
Interesting. So I think that for me was the beginning of my deconstruction.
Yeah, it opened the question door.
Yeah.
And once you
Yeah. It
open it,
started
you
the,
can't you can't close it. I mean, you can, but
yeah.
you would, there would be a lot of suppression happening to close that
Yeah.
door again.
Yeah.
Yeah, once
Yeah.
it's like I use the analogy of, when you pull on a thread of a garment and it just
Hmm.
slowly starts to unravel,
Hmm.
the more that you pull it,
Yeah.
it's a little bit like
Yeah.
that. Um,
Yeah. If you keep pulling, it falls apart. The best thing to do is just like cut it off and like hope no one notices the hole, which I think
yes.
is what I did for a while.
Yeah. I mean, what was it like for you being a pastor?
It was miserable. It was like the
Oh.
worst year and a half of my life. Honestly, I had no business in this time of my life saying yes to this job. And I still go back and forth. It's been 5 years ago as of yesterday, and I still go back and forth in my mind trying to figure out should I have said, like, I had some misgivings about it even from the get-go. Should I have said no? But it
Yeah.
was like financially at the time, we didn't really have any other options. Like there were bills, this was a way to pay them. I had to say yes. I had just had my second child. So when we like, he asked me if I would consider taking this job right before I went on maternity leave.
Mm.
So I'm just like laying awake at night with my newborn, thinking about like, oh my gosh, like I get to be a pastor and like this is a chance for me to like fix all the problems I've ever noticed in worship anywhere. And like this church is gonna love it when I change everything.
Oh
And
gosh.
like patting my little,
Oh.
2-week-old baby, sweet, sweet baby, both of us thinking that was gonna work. But so it was like I had a baby and then we had to move to be closer and then and then I started working and yeah, it was rough. I mean, just physically, I was really struggling to adjust to having two kids. That was a huge adjustment. My second woke up a lot in the night, and didn't get sleep trained for, a year and a half. So pretty much the whole time I was working there, I wasn't getting a full night of sleep. So I'm trying to field, a new job just on like no sleep alone is
Mm.
terrible. But I think the harder part was that I had noticed some things like we really liked the church when we were like attending it. Once I started working there, it was like I pretty quickly noticed some cracks in the staff and the culture of the staff. Just some weird like, huh, that's weird. Nobody talks about this. Like that was a really inappropriate thing. How come no one's saying anything? Or like, huh, those people fought and they aren't resolving it. Like that's weird. And
It's like the
no,
closer
nobody's
you get to
talking
the
to me for
fire.
like a week. Yeah. Yeah. It was so once I started working full time,
Mm.
I saw it was like in it and I was like, oh, this place is miserable. Like
Oh.
at least for me, like maybe they're all doing okay, but this is not a fit. I didn't have that language for it, but I was just like very quickly it became clear that while everybody was super excited to hire me, nobody wanted to onboard me or train me. I feel like I was just kind of like hired and expected to fall in line and know what to do. I didn't really know the culture that well of the church. There was like, I'm a writer and a creative person, and I was pretty sure that they knew that when they hired me, but then it was like, okay, you need to be like mentoring interns and recruiting volunteers and developing these leadership pipelines. And, we need to be like, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I'm not good at that. Like,
Mm.
you don't want me to do that. And all the expectations of like, oh, well, now that you're a pastor, you need to be one of our pastors on call. So when people come in off the street looking for food, and if they want to talk to someone, you need to go talk to them. And I'm like, I am not trained in any kind of anything. Like, I don't know how to talk to someone who's having a psychotic break. I'm
Yeah.
scared. Like,
Not to
please,
mention the
please don't make me
safety.
do this. Yeah,
Absolutely.
like,
There is
hey, like
real
I at least
safety.
need someone in the room with me. And like, I
Mm.
guess I can pray for this person, but like, yeah. So very quickly, sorry, I get sort of like going
Oh,
on
that's
these things.
okay.
Yeah, it was really awful. And then things just started happening like, yeah, just like um having like staff members like be real insubordinate to me and not having any because they had grown up there. It was just like, well, you there, yeah, they're hard to deal with. You're just gonna have to figure it out. And I'm like, no, but like they're not doing what I am telling them to do. So what?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's because you're not being a good enough leader. And I was like, okay, so tell me how to be a good leader. And they're like, well, if you have to ask, like just YouTube it or something. And it was just like,
Oh my goodness.
yeah, I just felt really unsupported. And every night, so it's like I would finally fall asleep, and then my baby would wake me up at like 2 in the morning, and I would just lay there for hours reliving all these like horrible conversations and all these like mean things people had said. And yeah, it was just like nobody had my back, and I didn't understand why. And yeah, a few really horrible things happened, and in retrospect I'm like, I should have quit right then. That was a sign, but I didn't, because I believed that you have to stay and fight for forgiveness, and these are my brothers and
Anthem.
sisters in Christ. So I just
Mm.
dug in deeper and just hurt myself really worse and worse by staying in this place that was so damaging. And yeah, I have a lot of regret around just staying so long when I was in so much pain. So yeah, it sucked. I liked the title, but that's about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard because the closer you get, I guess, the more you see church as a business
Mm,
and all of the, church politics and, all of the ugliness happens and is seen the
yeah,
closer you get to the top of the food chain in the church. But
yeah,
it also sounds a little bit like, and this might just be my therapist brain turning on for a second. But it sounds a little bit like the period of time before you became a pastor. Your pastor might have been sort of like love bombing a little bit around, you'll be really
mm,
wonderful and it's about being a shepherd and all
oh
of
my
this really
gosh,
amazing
yeah,
language just to sort of, appeal to that emotional part of you that
yeah,
has a heart for people and
yeah,
then basically sign the dotted line and then righto, now it's all up to you. So
yeah.
it's almost like you were
That,
primed for that to happen.
yeah, I think you might be right. That resonates and makes me feel a little better. So thank
Yeah,
you.
good. I'm glad. I mean, and that's a bit of new, like new job,
Yeah, yeah.
like new baby, new family
Oh gosh,
dynamics,
yeah.
the new
We
role.
had like both kids were in preschool. I was working full
Yeah.
time for the first time as a mother. Like I hadn't worked full time. It was, yeah, it was too much. And like now I'd be like, if anybody was like, I think I'm gonna like move and I would be like,
Yeah,
I would strongly advise you to figure out a way to space that out
absolutely.
and do one at a time. But I was just so like, oh, if God wants this to happen, God will make a way. And
Yes.
I just couldn't hack it. And for good reason. Like
Yeah.
not not couldn't hack it, but well, okay.
Well,
I couldn't hack it because it was too much for any one human to hack.
yeah,
You know?
absolutely. And it was probably not a role that was, if we go with sort of Christian language of designed for you
Yeah.
or created for you,
Yeah.
that's not the role that you put a
Yeah.
creative soul into. That's
Yeah.
like putting an
Totally.
artist into the HR department. Like, why? That's not going to work.
Yeah.
That's a disaster.
Exactly it. I found myself thinking so many times because it was like find a volunteer team of writers, and I was like, but I'm a good writer. So like,
Yeah.
do I not get to write because I'm supposed to like
Mm,
coach people to write who don't want to write and who aren't good
yeah,
at it? Like, why can't I just write? Like,
absolutely.
but I think there is a part of me too, because I had grown up in this system that like being in vocational ministry was like the highest achievement and it was like a sign of success. It was like this
Yeah.
was me building my career in the worship world, in the
Mm,
in ministry world. This was like an advancement. And there was part of me that was just so flattered that they would give me this job that I was like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to prove it to myself and to everybody else that I
yeah.
could be a good leader. And at the end of that time, I was like, I don't really like leading. I don't
No.
like, I'm a thought leader,
Yeah.
but I'm not like a I don't like managing people. Like
Yeah.
I didn't like how people were like, "Can I go on vacation the week right before Christmas?" and having to be like, "No, idiot. Like that's when we do our most work. Like you can't go on
Yeah.
vacation right
Have
before
you been to
Christmas."
church?
And then they'd be like, I just like really feel like you're not supporting my family. And I'm like, I know I had a family too,
Mm,
dude. Like, I don't know what to tell
yeah.
you. Like, I didn't like that part. I didn't have
No.
it
Oh my
wasn't for me.
goodness.
So now I'm like pretty happy now to just be like kind of sitting behind my computer and writing little things and I hit send and
And I mean still leading, but leading in an authentic
yeah,
way. Or,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So I know a little bit about sort of because I followed you for a while. I know a little bit about how
Okay.
you left the church.
Mhm.
Tell us how that happened.
Okay, so 5 years ago, yesterday, as
Mm,
the of the date of recording, I just so many things have happened. I think I painted a picture of like this was not a happy. There was a lot of like really hard conversations happening all the way through. Church started struggling financially. I knew that ooh, when we're like six digits in the red, that can't be good.
okay.
And or like you know, six digits under budget.
Mm,
Um, and then there was a church plant that had sort of closed. I won't say failed, even though I think pretty much it was like this isn't working or going anywhere. So they
mm,
kind of folded back in. So all of a sudden, the staff that was working for that location was suddenly on staff with all of us.
oh,
And so then there's some duplication of roles. And so I started noticing things just getting weird. You know, all of my intuitive, like
mm,
spidey senses were tingling. And I just over Christmas was like, honey, I don't know why. Like, my boss won't look me in the eyes. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I'll have a job, but like, whatever. Like we just got to keep moving. And like, sure enough, right after break, I remember I was like, on stage giving announcements that Sunday, like to the whole welcome everybody into our community. If you're new with us today, come see the visitor. You know, that was like my day to give the announcements or whatever. And I'm just looking down at my boss slash senior pastor slash good friend who's just not looking at me. And he just looks so tortured. And I'm like, what is going on? And super uneasy. Anyways,
mm.
sure enough, the next day I get to work and he calls me into his office, and the lady who does HR is sitting there with a cardboard box under her chair. And I'm like, oh, this can't be good. And it was done so quick. It was just
Mm,
like, I think that, yeah, it was total HR jargon. Like, I think he probably Googled like how to fire someone in a church or, you know, got one of his
mm.
like church leadership resources, you
Yeah.
know, how to fire someone in a godly way. But it was very clinical. Um, and yeah, she gave me a box. I packed up my stuff, had to sign some documents, and then walk down a few doors, pick up my daughter from the on-site preschool and be like, come say goodbye to mommy's office because I'm never coming back here again. They let her continue going to preschool there for a few months, which was nice because, you know, preschool is expensive and it was
Yeah.
really nice that she could go free. But yeah, it
Mm,
was just like so quick. So, but yet the most thing, I mean, I think I've painted a clear picture. Like I wasn't very happy in this job. And when I was, you know, closing things down that afternoon, I was looking through my like to-do list and I'm like, okay, I don't really care about this place, but there's a few people I care about and I don't want to totally screw my friends over. So, like, is there anything that I'm in the middle of that I need to pass along to them? And I looked at my to-do lists and all I felt was like incredible relief that I didn't have to do any of these tasks. Like everything on my to-do list was something I was dreading. And I was like, oh, thank God I do not have to do this anymore. And I was like, I'm so excited. I don't have to come back to work here. Like, I hate this job.
Yeah.
But that like moment of relief was like brief and then quickly like subsumed by just like the sheer trauma and significance. I don't think I realized in that moment the full scope of like what I had just lost. Like I thought I lost a job, but upon
Mm,
reflection, it was pretty clear to me quickly that I was like, I can't do this again. I can't go to another church. Like this is going to keep happening at churches and I can't do it anymore.
mm,
And then that was really the like, oh shit, because
ah,
I have built my whole career around working in churches.
mm.
What am I going to do now if I don't want to work in a church anymore?
Absolutely. I mean, yes,
Mm.
you lost a job, but the job was you.
Yeah.
And so, you
So
know,
much identity and
yeah.
work, like my whole like course of the Christian college and the years working towards this was just like lost. And
Mm,
I still grieve that a lot, to be like, yeah, I have my work on the internet now, which I so love, but I'm still struggling to make ends meet, and
yeah.
it's frustrating to be starting over and to be new and having to like pay my dues again, that's a big loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's really difficult, particularly for people who were pastors. I've spoken to a few now, and it's more than a job. It's especially when you think that it's your calling or it's part of God's plan and all of that sort of, Christian language or jargon that is your whole identity is wrapped up in that, right? So it's like,
100%.
you
Yeah.
know, it's more than losing a job. And so there's probably relief around not having to do the tasks and
Yeah.
grief and anger and all of those other emotions about what have I actually lost, and
Yeah.
also the really shitty way it was done.
Yeah.
Like,
That's it.
I
That's
mean,
and that's what I've been reliving this weekend. I think just
yeah,
the anniversary of it and it being a significant milestone since I'm just like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm like kind of back in it again for the first time in a while. I feel like I've had a few years of just being like pretty good, but it feels very fresh and very recent right now.
yeah.
And it's just a mile down the street,
Oh
or what, a
wow.
couple kilometers or whatever.
Oh yeah. I have no idea what the miles to
It's
kilometers
2.3
ratio is.
kilometers down the
Oh,
street.
good
But
job.
yeah, I don't
Oh,
know if that's right or not.
oh. I would have absolutely thought that was right. I have no idea about that ratio. What is it like being so close to it? I mean, struggle driving in past my former church when I go to my hometown because there's no other way I can get into the town without passing
Yeah.
it. Trust me,
Yeah.
I've looked. Um,
Yeah.
and so it's like, what is it like being so close?
Yeah. I don't love it. It's a big enough area. Like I'm in Orange County, California, which is outside of LA. So it's just we're definitely in suburban sprawl. So there's different cities, but they all mash into each other. So there's a lot of people here. So there's a lot of stuff real close to where you are. Like, the same grocery store might be, one here and one just a few miles away. And
Mm,
so I live like just far away enough that I don't have to drive by it unless I want to go to like one particular, shopping center that I do go to sometimes and I can kind of get there. But there's something about having to take like a ton of side streets to get
yeah.
there that feels just as traumatic as just
Yeah.
like driving by it. Like, I
Yeah.
don't want to let them affect my like productivity.
Mm,
So it wanes over time, but definitely like driving by the place, I like will kind of like like, don't look, don't look, don't look. And then I'm like, you know, I
Little
can't help
side
but kind of just
glance.
like whose car is there? Like, oh, look, they
Yeah.
built more. Like, trying kind of just like seeing and recognizing the cars of people who are considered really good friends who are still
Mhm.
really involved there, and and feeling conflicted, man, if you really believed me when I
Mm,
told you what happened to me, I don't think you could keep working there.
yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know what that, I guess, it's like, there goes that friendship, but I think the biggest thing I worry about still is just running into people. I don't run into people often. It wasn't a huge church. And like I said, they tend to be on a different part of town. And I think after COVID, people do a lot more online shopping and,
Yes.
drive up orders. But yeah, I still wonder, like, I have little scripts in my mind, like, okay, if I run into the pastor's wife, what am I going to say? If I run into this person, what will I
Yeah.
say? Like, if I run into this person, and I don't like that I'm always doing that. So clearly I still have some work to do processing all this, but
Mm.
yeah, it's not my favorite, and yet at the same time I feel also really committed to, like, I actually like it here. Like, I like where I live, and so I'm not going to let them run me out of town.
Yeah.
So
Uh,
I have made my own spot, like my kids, our school is like, that's where we do. In my neighborhood, I feel very connected to. And like, there's like nobody from the church is in this neighborhood, and no one's at our school. So like, I have made my own little safe places that I can get around. But
yeah.
yeah.
It reminds me of when David Hayward says that deconstruction is a way of life, not a destination. And
Mm,
it's a little bit like that
yeah.
because I don't think that there is ever a moment where we go, right, oh, I think I'm done and dusted. Good. Everything's,
Yeah.
healed, processed, done. I think there is
Yeah.
always the anxiety is just shifted, right? Instead of
Yeah.
worrying about all of
Oh
the
my gosh.
God's plans. We're now
Yes.
worried about all of, running into people. And you are
Yeah.
certainly not the only person. I've run through a million scenarios in my head of what I would say running into certain people. And
Yeah.
and I even sort of go, there's certain people where I'm sure I will only run into them if it's at a funeral or something like
Yeah.
that. And I go, great, people don't like to chat at funerals all that much. Great. I don't need to, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna like duck in, duck out. But yeah, it's just a shift of anxiety into a different
Yeah.
space. Um,
Yeah. Which could explain why over the last few years I have been so much more interested in trying to find ways to make peace with
mm,
my Christian past.
yeah.
Because I feel like, yeah, deconstruction is a very anxious process, like you said, but it's like, what's the point? Like, I was anxious before. What's the
Mm,
point of this if I'm not going to someday, and
yeah.
like giving ourselves space to like go through the grief and go through the cynicism and the anger, which are absolutely part of the process. But ultimately, like, I don't want to look back on that like 35 years of my life and say, oh, what a waste. Like, I
Yeah.
need more meaning from my life. And so I think that's why I'm like almost on a rescue mission of like, okay, yes, there's a lot of like stuff in there that was bad, but like, what can I go in and say, like, no, this was a good thing. Like, this was a good thing I can take with me, even to say, like, okay, that pastor like really screwed me over. But you know what? Before he did that, he called out this thing in me. He called out this word pastor in me. And I still take that with me. Like, I'm not going to call myself a pastor
Yeah.
anymore. For a while, I was like a pastor to, I called myself like pastor to Christian misfits of the internet or something. And then I was like, oh, I don't think I'm a Christian anymore. So never mind. But just that
Yeah.
sense of like, hey, like, I see your soul.
Mm,
Like, here's some care for your soul. Like, I still feel that in me.
mm,
But yeah, so grateful for that nugget, even though not grateful for the whole situation.
yeah.
And that's important to me, I guess, to
Yeah.
do that work.
Absolutely. I think even just, I don't think anything is all good or all bad. I think
Yeah.
everything sort of sits in a spectrum. And I've found that, I guess, through my own deconstruction is just about creating new language or reinventing the old language. It reminds me of a post that you did over Christmas about joy and peace not being Christian terms, because
Mhm.
often that language around Christmas is hard to sort of hold and sit with. And so I
Yeah.
remember seeing that post and going, oh, that's so good. Like there was joy and peace before I became a Christian. And there will be
Yeah.
joy and peace long after as well.
Yeah.
What was I mean, and I say journey because it's still ongoing, but what has your deconstruction journey been like for you?
Hmm. I think in some ways, I mean, everybody has a different way they go about it. I think the silver lining of mine starting the way I did was that I think some people who start like sort of like have all of this like wrapped up life that's like going well for them, and when they start deconstructing they slowly start seeing that it's going to affect this thing they have.
Yeah.
um Mine was sort of like the reverse effect. It was like the bottom fell out from under me. I
Mm,
lost my community, my job, and my calling, and a lot of my friends in one afternoon. And then I had to figure out where to go from there.
yeah.
And so instead of this, like, I think deconstruction is really hard when you're seeing and experiencing what you're about to lose if you keep questioning.
Mm,
But I lost everything first. And then, in that sense, was sort of released from any obligations to anyone or to any system. Like, I didn't lose my job because I deconstructed. I lost my job and then I deconstructed.
yeah.
So there's the ways in which I think my experience is a little bit unique and gave me some freedom to
Mm,
just do it in a little bit of like a cocoon of like the safety of not having any witnesses. Like
mm,
I was just a wreck, like in all the ways. I was hurt on
yeah.
like every level. And um well, not every level, because I did have my family, my husband, my partner, and my two kids, and that was a really safe and cozy,
Mm.
happy space. And my kids were like, I love you when you're not stressed out all the time, you
I
know?
bet. Uh,
Um, but yeah, I just, I think that was the first time in my life when I didn't feel an obligation from, like, there was no connection between my beliefs and my livelihood anymore.
mm,
So I was free to ask all the questions. Like, we talked about like when you start pulling the thread, everything unravels. So the best thing to do is just like chop it off. I
yeah.
had been doing that. Like, I mentioned that like I had started deconstructing with thinking about women in ministry and stuff, but I had also started thinking other questions that were very dangerous. And I had even voiced them to this pastor. And I don't think he was thrilled to hear that, but things like, like questioning Jesus on the cross, like, was that
Oh,
actually significant? Like, what did that
wow.
actually do? What did that actually mean? Um,
Yeah, boy, I
so
bet
with
that did not go down well.
yeah.
Oh my
And he
goodness.
was like, yeah, no, ask your questions. And it was like, but
Ask
the implied
ask
was like,
different
and get some
questions.
answers because you can't not,
Oh.
But yeah, so just like the freedom to go ahead and ask those
Mm,
was really great. And it was just sort of this sense of like, you guys don't want me, like, I'm gonna do whatever I want. Like, I'm gonna
mm,
ask whatever questions I want. I'm gonna say whatever I want online. And
yeah.
yeah.
Mm,
So it was a lot of, to answer your question, what was the process of deconstruction like? It was a lot of just, I just had to heal as a person.
mm,
And in the process of healing, righting the wrongs, it became very clear how much of my belief system was part of the wrong that had led me to get so hurt.
mm. What was it like for you trying to find a more authentic or preferred sense of spirituality?
Honestly, I think up until very recently, I just wasn't interested in spirituality anymore. Like it was such a big part of my life,
Mm,
and it had consumed my whole life that when I finally deconstructed and to the point that I could say my spirituality isn't the most important thing about me, it was like there's this whole other aspect of who I am that's been sadly neglected
Yeah.
for a long time. And it was like, I just need to give this part of who I am some room and some time in the sun. So, like, trying to reconnect with my body, like my physicality, like so much of my spirituality was like cerebral and emotional, but like very separated because it had to be because my body was like screaming at me that
Yeah.
something was very wrong and I couldn't hear it. So
Yeah.
allowing that to come back and just allowing myself to be someone who like doesn't read the Bible in the morning and doesn't have spiritual practices and just lets life be and exist and isn't trying to like manipulate it with spirituality. Like it's taken me a while just to like let things lie
Mm.
and wait for sort of like, when there's a fire and everything's black and then eventually things just start sprouting up again. I feel like just recently these little tiny spiritual buds have popped up and I'm like, oh, like new growth is happening. I'm not forcing it, but it's naturally coming out of me because I've let things sit for a while. And that has been really wonderful to
Mm.
get to kind of start fresh and see what
Yeah.
it's like to be organically spiritual and not have it just shoved on me.
Yeah. Absolutely. I find that it's when it is the most natural is when you know, because I think when you leave, well, for me, when I left, I suddenly had this moment of like, well, who am I? What do I like? Did I like that just because I was supposed to like that, or
Yeah.
do I actually like that?
Yeah.
And so, when it comes naturally, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. So
Yeah.
this is what it
This
is.
is who
This
I
is who I
am.
am. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's
Yep. That's
really
exactly it.
nice. Yeah. Are
Yeah.
there days for you when you miss it?
There are aspects that I miss. I
Mm.
never miss going to church.
Hmm.
Um, I miss, I was in worship ministry, so I miss music being a part of my life more regularly.
Yeah.
Um, People say they like miss the community. I don't know if it's just because I was in ministry, but when I look back, I'm like, I never really had community even when I was in church. It was like I
Yeah.
was always like a little like outside because I was in ministry and
Mm.
as my therapist later helped me realize, like I'm sort of a free spirit and a nomadic. I have like a nomadic soul, and like free spirits and nomadic souls are not drawn to long-term relationships with churches.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh, I was never gonna like my people don't go to church.
Mm.
My people
No.
do other things.
Yeah.
And so I have found much stronger community in other places. But yeah, so I don't really miss the community. I miss some of the people. But the good ones are still in my life because
Yeah.
they know
The
the
good
real me.
ones.
But yeah, the
The
good
good
ones.
ones. Yeah. The good ones are the ones that are
I
still
feel
here.
like
Right?
my filter's a little low today. So we're getting
Uh,
getting the real business. But yeah, there's things I miss, but overall not really. I'm
yeah.
so much happier now. I like getting to do what feels right to me and not trying to force myself to fit into something that somebody else told me
Yeah.
was right. I have no interest in doing that. I think I'm just not like an organized religion person.
Mm,
It's just not a good fit for me.
absolutely. Yeah.
I think some people are,
Yeah.
and I am very happy for that. It's like I hold as a really high value the fact that like different souls need different things. And so
Yeah.
I even really honor and respect people for whom evangelical Christianity is like a real path to peace for them. Like you get one life and you got to make it through. And if that is what helps you, great. Like take accountability for the harm that your system is causing. But
Mm,
you know, what with my kids, like I'm not gonna yuck someone else's yum,
yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah. And I
So
think
this is just not my cup of tea. But
no, yeah, exactly. And I think, there are there are so many different spaces that people can fall into on that deconstruction. Some deconstruct and deconvert, some
Hmm.
reconstruct and find a more
Yeah.
authentic faith, some
Yeah.
just don't go to church and still hold that
Yeah.
Christian mentality. And so I think one of the beautiful things that I've found in talking to such diverse people is that, you know, people fall on that spectrum of faithful to faithless, if we go with that sort of spectrum,
Yeah.
at all
Yeah.
different points.
Hmm.
And all of that is okay,
Hmm.
providing, like you said, there is accountability and recognition of harm and all of those
Yeah.
things. Um,
Yeah.
if we come into the present day, what brings you joy and peace now?
Hmm. I think after living so much at odds with my internal world, it still brings me an incredible amount of joy and peace to go through the practice of when I feel unsettled to kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, but just sort of like center myself and ground myself and tap into like, hey, like almost if I were to do like an IFS thing and like talk to my inner child, like, hey, little joy, like what's going on in there? Like, what are you feeling? What do you need?
Mm,
Like what in your environment is causing you distress and what can I do about it? Like giving myself permission to do that and to believe myself and then to take action
mm,
to create the life in which all the parts of me that are finally having a chance to talk will thrive. That has been a great joy because it affects everything. Like,
mm,
yeah, what do I need to get through today? What do I need to get through this? Like my child who's screaming at me and saying mean things to me, and like, what do I need to, or like, what do I want to accomplish in 2024? How am I going to set goals? It's like, yeah, still just really loving the freedom to like love myself that I never
mm.
had for so long.
Yeah. And offer self-compassion as opposed to
Yeah.
berating.
Yeah.
So much
Yeah.
of time in church is just about, less of me, less of me, less of me, more of
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, less of
Mm-hmm.
me. That sort of
Mm-hmm.
language is
We
constant.
can't even sing this worship song because it says the word I too many times.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, even just, having that ability to acknowledge and offer self-compassion and go, you know, I am important is
Mm-hmm.
is incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
And not in a sense of like, I don't have any idea that like I'm a more important person than anybody else in the world, but I am the only one who can take responsibility for myself.
yeah.
And I am the only person I can take responsibility for, I
Mm,
guess.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's like, well, I got to start here before I do anything else. Like, if this isn't right, I'm not going to have much, I'm not going to be able to reliably offer anything of good because the source of what I'm putting out isn't in a good place. Like, then that's going to not be good. And I want it to be good. So I got to be good here. I have to, yeah, I don't know, quality ingredients make a better recipe or something.
I love that. It makes me think of I don't know whether RuPaul's Drag Race.
I haven't seen it, but I
Yeah.
think I probably need to.
It's wonderful, but the catchphrase at the end of every episode is that Rue says, "If you can't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love someone else?" And it's
Oh,
it's
yep.
kind of like that. It's like, how
There you
am I
go.
going to be compassionate to somebody else if I can't be compassionate towards me?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah. Okay. I am finishing all of these episodes with the same question, which is,
Okay.
what are you saying? What word of wisdom, what message do you have to somebody who is fresh in their deconstruction?
Mm-hmm. The number one thing I think that causes stress and anxiety when people are starting their deconstruction is there is a sense of urgency. There was a real value in Christianity to know exactly what you believe and to be able to articulate it. And when you start deconstructing some of those beliefs, you may sort of accidentally bring that mindset with you that there's an expectation that you're supposed to know exactly what you believe and be able to articulate it for the sake of, in evangelicalism, that is like to be, any moment pop quiz, somebody comes up into your life, are you able to like tell them how to accept Jesus into their hearts and save them from hell?
Mm.
That quiz no longer exists. There is no urgency anymore. I realized I had this image of like God with like a stopwatch, like, are you done yet? Like, are you done going through this? Like, and there was a real sense of like, oh my gosh, like, wait, if I don't believe in the Bible, I don't believe in this. And like, I need to read all the books and like, I have to figure everything out.
Mm.
There's no deadline. And so that's like the number one thing I tell people who are overwhelmed is just like, you know what? There is no deadline.
Yeah.
To quote David Hayward as a quote from you again, like it's a lifestyle,
Yeah.
not a destination, or actually don't know what you said, but yeah, so you can take the pressure off because number one, you don't have
Mm.
a deadline. Number two, you don't owe anyone an explanation. You
Yeah.
can say, you can keep this part of your life private until you're ready to talk about it.
Mm.
And it's not something, demolish in a day. So give yourself the time to take it apart carefully and
Mm.
thoughtfully and gently and take breaks from it. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I love that.
make it fun.
Yeah. Actually, there is I love the make it fun bit because I think we forget that, I mean, deconstruction and healing tend to go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we forget that joy and laughter and fun are all
Yeah.
parts of healing as well. It's not all doom and
Mm-hmm.
gloom and,
Yeah.
I laugh with my clients all the time because
Yeah.
laughter is healing as well as crying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah. And it's like almost like we buy into this thought that deconstruction is this terrible thing we're doing and we're going to do it anyways. It's like we believe them when they say, like, oh, you're rejecting the faith. You're
Mhm.
leaving, like, even the word deconstruction is like a loss, a grief, like something's
Yeah.
falling apart. And so it's like almost like this expectation that we have to do it, that's like part of the process, is it being this really awful thing. But yeah, just like making sure that it is still part of a good life.
Mhm.
Like good life can coexist with deconstruction and
Yeah.
having fun and taking breaks. And I think eventually what people find is that like, oh, I can have more fun now and I am more
Yeah,
joyful and like I feel more
absolutely.
permission to like do the things I like and want and see.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely. Thank you.
thank you.
It's
This
been
was really
so
nice.
fun. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
it.
this was really nice. Thank you, Sam.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Surface. Until next time, take care, stay true to who you are, and remember, your voice and your story matters, always.